maybe a minute. We'll give everyone about a minute more to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. We'd love to hear where everyone is coming from today. So if you'd like to drop where you are in the chat, we have a good number of participants today from all over. Yeah. Gosh, we have all corners. This is awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here this morning. My name is Amanda Boquist. My pronouns are she, her. I am part of the school mental health team at the Southwest MHTTC. I have my colleagues here today, Jennifer Barham-Prawl and Mordecai Dixon. And we are so excited to bring you this awesome webinar today. I think we will all gain an incredible amount of information and knowledge from Dr. Hinduja's presentation today. So before we get started, just wanted to go over a few things. This presentation was prepared for the MHTTC network under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in this presentation are the views of our speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services, or SAMHSA. The MHTTC network really wants to make sure that we understand that language matters. We use affirming and respectful, recovery-oriented language in all activities, and this webinar is no exception. So we just want to ensure that everyone knows that. And then as an organization, we are dedicated to having events where everyone feels welcome. We want to create safe environments for everyone and make sure that we are being kind. This is our code of conduct that we've created just as an organization. So wanted to bring that all to your attention. And finally, a few housekeeping items today. We hope that technology will be not an issue today, but if for some reason we lose connection or need to end unexpectedly, we will contact you during using your registration emails. Secondly, we like this to be an interactive conversation, if you will, but we would like for you all to use the chat. So please remain on mute. If you feel comfortable having your video on, that's great. If you would like it to be off, that's great too. We invite you to just be comfortable as we listen to the presentation. If you have any questions or comments, we are going to be monitoring the chat box closely. We will be doing a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So if for some reason you have questions and they're not addressed immediately, please know that we are keeping track of those and we will address all of those at the end of the webinar. And finally, at the end, after everything is said and done, truth be told, probably tomorrow, you'll receive, all participants will receive an email from me, and you'll get a link to all of the handouts that are referenced today, a link for the slide deck, and a recording that is password protected and may only be available for a certain amount of time. But I will include all of those details in the follow-up email that you will receive today or tomorrow. I still see a whole bunch more people who are joining. So that is wonderful. Again, myself and my colleagues, Mordecai and Jennifer, will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, concerns, please utilize that to the best of your ability. Okay, so this is Dr. Samir Hinduja. He is a professor at Florida Atlantic University, the co-director of the Cyberbullying Research Center, and faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. He is recognized internationally for his groundbreaking work on the subjects of cyberbullying, sexting, and social media and gaming abuse. As a noted researcher and speaker for the last 20 years, Dr. Hinduja has trained technologists, educators, mental health professionals, parents, and students around the world on how to promote the positive use of technology, building healthy online communities, and fostering well-being. And as a representative for the South-Southwest MHTC, we are so excited that he is here today to join us for the next hour and a half and share his knowledge.
Thanks, Amanda. It's great to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say, but the first thing that I want to begin with is, Happy New Year. When it comes to New Year's, hopefully we're full of, expectation. And I know that we have no clue about the challenges that we might face, but we do get to choose our perspective. And so I hope that we're leaning in the direction of optimism and hope and just believing for the best. So I truly wish you a wonderful 2024. I spend my life at the intersection of youth and well-being. A lot of that also has to do with their technology use. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing with you one component of that. I focus on a lot of components, and maybe we'll get into some of those as well during the Q&A session. But as Amanda mentioned, we will make sure we get you PDF resources. We will make sure we get you the slide deck, the recording. And for those of you who have heard me speak before, you know that I pride myself on getting back to everyone who reaches out to me. So if you need a resource, if you need some recommendation related to a short movie clip that could be instructional, if you need a certain recommendation related to strategies or some sort of document with screenshots walking you through this or that, don't hesitate to reach out. I will get back to you. Bottom line is that we pour ourselves out to make a difference in the lives of students. I'm an educator and a parent. You're educators and mental health professionals, and many of you are parents as well. And we're just co-laboring together to try to make a difference. And that's what brings us fulfillment. We didn't get into this field because of the salary. We got into it because we wanted to have some sort of, measurable progress amongst these populations that we're serving. So I'm going to dive into my slide deck, and I really look forward to your questions. So continue to add them to the chat. We will get to as many as possible. And if I don't get to them, we can dialogue afterwards. So I'm going to mute my video. I'm going to open up my slide deck and share my screen. And then I will minimize all of these Zoom toolbars, which are often in the way, these floating meeting controls. Go. Let's move this out of the way. Let's move that down there. And then we will begin. So I mentioned that I cover a lot of topics in what I do. I focus on social emotional learning. I think a lot about positive psychological assets, such as, again, empathy, which is what we'll discuss today, but also resilience and hope. And my focus isn't on only sort of preventing and reducing the prevalence of problematic interpersonal behaviors amongst the kids we serve, the teens we serve, but also what we can do to promote civility, to promote peer respect, to promote healthier school climates. All of that, of course, makes such a difference, not just in reducing the problem behaviors, but in accomplishing the goals that you and I want to see happen. For example, higher academic achievement, better attendance, higher morale, more respect across the entire community, and more collaboration. So that is what I'm all about. Let me move again these menu bars so that they're not in the way, and we will move forward. So last May, you might recall that our Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, put out an advisory related to social media. And I know that social media is just one component of the lives of our youth, but you'll recall that he focused on the fact that without a doubt, there are negatives associated with social media, and that we need to just be a lot more intentional about, of course, researching it, but also being involved in a variety of ways in the lives of our youth, whether we're guardians, whether we're parents, whether we're after school coaches or educators or counselors, etc. Now, in that same advisory, even though the media ran with the negatives, he also pointed out that there were positives with social media. And so the first thing that I would say is that even though many of us come to the conversation with a specific view about social media and technology as perhaps being, I don't know if we want to use words as like evil and the bane of our existence and so forth. I hear a lot of these phrases. There are a lot of positives, and the research bores that out as well. So I think a measured perspective, I think, also helps us interact with our kids, because they can pick up on the fact that we, let's say, hate it completely, and then they won't open up to us at all. And we know that having that open line of communication is essential for us to make any progress with many of these peer issues, of course, tied into the online realm as well. Plus, when it comes to bullying or cyberbullying or harassment or cruelty or rejection or exclusion or any of these other elements, I do want to say that there's just one element within a constellation of other elements that are occurring in the lives of youth. So, go back 15, 20, 30 years, if you're you or me, and think about what you faced when you were an adolescent. Maybe it was your parents were fighting all of the time. Maybe you really struggled with your complexion and you just engaged in a lot of self-hate related to you physically. Maybe it was related to some sort of habit that was destructive, but you just couldn't stop. Maybe it was a depression, and whether that was, clinical, and you were on medication, or whether it was just something that was there that you never sought treatment about. So, there's a lot of elements that a teen has on their shoulders, and increasingly it seems that there's more pressures and more stresses, both internal as well as external. Plus, we're now adding to that the technological realm, which again is my area of expertise. So it's so much. And this is just another reminder, which maybe is not necessary for me to articulate, but I still want to. Let's continue to be patient and gracious and kind with our youth, because yes, they are experts in what it means to be a youth these days, but they don't have everything figured out. Just like you and I didn't have everything figured out as well when we were trying to navigate this very, very difficult terrain. So I also want to say that across our nation, there's been a number of laws that are either being proposed or attempted to be passed related to youth and really social media use and a bunch of those sorts of aspects. And when it comes to this, I think that, they have a place, but I also think that more of the responsibility is on my shoulders, on educators' shoulders, mental health professionals' shoulders, pediatricians, school nurses, those who work in the community with kids. It's really on our shoulders. But I don't want that to make you think, oh, dear heavens, another thing on my shoulders. I want you to feel empowered, because it means like we have a role to play. We have a place, with these youth, to really connect with them, really demonstrate that we care about them. And then honestly, it's not rocket science. It's you just being involved in their lives with encouragement and affirmations, and then some strategies which we'll get into. And that's what makes a difference. So to begin with, when you think about bullying, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of it does, of course, sort of occur across a variety of environments. Some of it affects the online realm or implicates the online realm. And so you think about all these platforms that are popular amongst youth, whether it's Twitch or TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat or X/Twitter, YouTube, Fortnite, Roblox. And then in the bottom row, we've got Discord and PlayStation Network and Xbox Network, and then, of course, Switch Online. So the vast majority of youth are having relatively positive experiences at school and online, but without a doubt, there's still a proportion which has to deal with mistreatment or, again, rejection or cruelty or maliciousness or humiliation or even threats. So it spans the gamut. Some of it is mild, some of it is major, but again, most kids, they're not sort of constantly inundated with these sorts of issues. I don't want to convey that it's an epidemic spiraling out of control. It's not. It still needs to be on our radar, and we still need to be extremely active, but it's not an epidemic spiraling out of control. We have our definitions about bullying, and I don't need to belabor this. We understand that there's typically intentional behavior that's hurtful. We have that concept of repetition that takes place, and then it's really up to the target and how they articulate the harm, how they felt the harm. It's not necessarily what I think about what happened in that situation as a bystander or even as an adult. With cyberbullying, same sort of deal. And it's youth using technology in order to mistreat and harass, and typically it's occurring repeatedly. We collected new data last year. I do want to share with you a handful of slides related to data, but I will go through this relatively quickly because we'll be getting you the slides. I just think it's always important to go back to the data because we want to have an empirically driven approach to all that we're doing. We can't just go on anecdotes. We can't just go on what we're hearing from this school or that colleague. So this was last summer. What we found is that on the left side of the chart, 1 out of 3 youth, again, this is a nationally representative sample of youth across the US, middle schoolers and high schoolers, 1 out of 3 have been bullied at school in the last month. 3 out of 4 have been bullied at school in their lifetime. Right side of the chart, if we just want to summarize this quickly, about 1 out of 2 have been bullied in the last month online, whereas a little bit over 1 out of 2 will tell you that in their lifetime, they've been targeted online. Again, middle schoolers and high schoolers across America. So then I get the question, is this going up? I did mention to you that it's not an epidemic spiraling out of control, but when it comes to cyberbullying, we are seeing an increase. You and I, if we're hanging out over coffee, I'm sure we can come up with a lot of reasons as to why this might happen. And perhaps the largest catalyst was COVID-19 and the fact that we had distance learning and youth were just in front of screens so much more often. And then, of course, the friendships and the socialization and the relationships, and then the drama and the issues also bubbled up more frequently on those platforms. With this data set, I wanted to share with you some things just to have them on your radar because they popped for me. Maybe they'll also pop for you. Again, we'll get you this more specifically so you can look at it at your leisure. But I thought this was interesting. Mean comments or mean names about me with a sexual meaning. So, is that sexual harassment? What does that look like? 16% of youth across America. 14% dealt with cruelty related to race or color. And then cruelty related to religion. So, of course, I'm always thinking about identity-based harassment. We've got these protected statuses. In some jurisdictions, many jurisdictions, is that a hate crime? What can we do about this? Why are our youth not deterred? Why do they seem a little bit more freed from the law, social convention, morals, how they've been raised? Well, maybe that's also part of the issue. We can talk about it, but this is clearly a problem. And then a couple other things I thought were interesting. Repeatedly contacted me via text or online, over 20%, so over 1 out of 5. Someone stalked me online, 14%, and then someone tracked or monitored my location or activities after I told them to stop, about 1 out of 10. So again, I wanted to bring these up to you because these are interesting and they're relatively new. We're seeing an issue as it relates to technology being used in these sort of controlling or monitoring or invasive type facilities or capacities. And so thinking about sort of takeaways, when we're talking with our youth, we might be talking about, predators online. We might be talking about cyberbullying and sexting, but I think it's important to kind of drill down a little bit and talk about more of these nuanced behaviors because maybe our youth discard it. Maybe they're like, this is just part and parcel of growing up online these days. Not necessarily true, and definitely not something we want to justify and just sort of discard and say it's normative. So at the beginning, Amanda talked about how we try to view things through this sort of trauma-informed lens. Something I've studied recently, and my colleague and I, we have a paper and review related to this. Thinking specifically about cyberbullying, very briefly, you can see in this chart that strong emotions resulted when the person, the target, just thinks about what happened with them being victimized online. We got anger, frustration, embarrassment, sadness, anxiety, loneliness. And next, we're talking about who do they tell? We're seeing that 7 out of 10 talk to a parent, but from that point on, it really just decreases greatly. And that's a bummer for me because I mentioned I'm an educator, and maybe a bummer for you because I bet you exhaust yourself conveying to your students that, look, if you're dealing with anything that's weird or creepy or uncomfortable or drama filled, I hope that you'll come to me and trust me that I will come through for you. But unfortunately, they're still not talking to school counselors, teachers, principals, someone else at school, etc. 1 out of 10, they suffer silently. They don't talk to anyone. We have to continue to counter that message. And maybe it's going to take more and more older youth, serving as, let's say, that point of contact to check in with the younger youth who might be targeted every so often, because clearly our youth are hesitant to talk to the adults, at least at school. And then how do they respond? Okay, it's great to see that 7 out of 10 blocked, but I'm very disappointed to see that only 31%, 30.6 reported it to the site or the app. All of these platforms, they have facilities built in where within a few touches of the touchscreen or clicks on your console device, your handset controller, you should be able to report another person for being a jerk or being a troll or being hateful or harassing. And so I think also it's just related to misinformation. Many students perhaps assume that if they report on someone online, that other person is going to find out that it was them who sort of narked on them, who ratted on them, but that's not the case. Typically, always the platform investigates things behind the scenes, and if the behavior violated the rules or the terms of service, then they'll go ahead and take it down. So we just have got to get our students to continue to report. Of course, come to us at school if it's occurring in the lunchroom or in the classroom or in a hallway. And of course, come to us if it's happening by another student here at school, but it's occurring online. Got to give us a chance to come through for you. And then secondly, do what's in your power. Control your online experience. Block, mute, report. You don't need to just take it like a punk. And then safety. We care a lot about safety. So students who are not bullied or cyberbullied, 91% feel safe. But when you're bullied at school, that drops down to 83% in the middle there who feel safe at school. And isn't it interesting that if you're cyberbullied, the percentage is much lower? So 70, let's say 8%, maybe not much lower, but lower. Because rationally, I would think that cyberbullying would maybe affect feelings of safety at school much less than you actually being bullied at school, in let's say a physical or, one-to-one sort of way. But this is what we're seeing. Just a few more data related slides. And then again, we'll get into a lot of prevention and response type strategies. Very actionable, very practical, because I know that's why you're here. So just wanted to point out here that about 20% have skipped school because of cyberbullying. And we see that over half have been cyberbullied in a way that deeply affected their ability to learn and feel safe. I'm not sure if you're dealing with some administrators who still trivialize online harassment and online bullying, but here we see the majority, and yes, I know it's just 51%, but it's still the majority of kids who, when they're targeted, it's deeply affecting their ability to learn, and it's deeply undermining their ability to feel safe. So that clearly matters, and that should hopefully marshal the resources that we need, whether it's personnel or curriculum or programming or assemblies or policy review or expert guidance, whatever it takes to sort of level up to support our student base. And then thinking about how it's affected them, you see that they have negative beliefs when they're targeted. They feel very upset when something reminds them of it. They have difficulty concentrating. It negatively affects their friendships, and psychosomatically, they're struggling when it comes to falling asleep or staying asleep. So again, this matters clearly. It's deeply affecting our youth. Not all of them, not the majority of them, but a meaningful proportion. And then here again, you can see that they lost interest in activities they loved. It hurt their schoolwork as well, and they had repeated disturbing and unwanted memories. So I was excited about this research because, again, we just worked on it last year. We have a paper in review, and again, maybe this could be used as evidence of the problem on your side. Let me know. So now let's switch gears and talk about empathy. All of us have a general idea of what empathy is. If we're a parent or guardian, we're trying to raise empathy-filled children, and we're hoping that in our schools as well, when our kids interact with each other, they're putting themselves in the shoes of other people, and they are acting towards them with common sense and kindness. And so we've got cognitive empathy, and we've got affective empathy. So affective empathy is being able to deeply feel how another person is feeling, whereas cognitive empathy is, okay, maybe I can't necessarily feel on this visceral level what you're going through right now, but I can cognitively understand it. Like, it makes sense that you would be deeply hurt by this. And so as a consequence, I'm going to adjust or modify the way that I treat you or what I do in reaction. So when it comes to empathy, we see empathy when we have school shootings. That's wonderful, in terms of seeing that empathy. What I would like to see, what you would like to see, is empathy just to be the default. Like, this is just how we are. We have been very intentional about prioritizing this value across our school. And maybe it's tied into, the golden rule. Maybe it's tied into our mission statement. But however we do it and whatever messaging strategies we use, it's constantly front and center. We constantly have it top of mind. And of course, staff, faculty, administrators, every person on campus is part of this, where it's like, we're going to demonstrate empathy and be understanding and gracious because life is hard and everyone's fighting a hard battle. hopefully over time, through those intentional interventions, you get the rest of the student body on board. And we'll talk again about how to do that. So let me share with you a little bit about our empathy research. I was curious, okay, you're being bullied at school, but what are you being bullied about? Is it similar to what I was being bullied about when I was growing up? What you were being bullied about when you were growing up? You see that 60% were bullied at school because of their physical appearance. And I would say, okay, that kind of reminds me of when I was growing up. But then you also see some of these other, protected statuses, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, religion, etc. Then this also sort of, let me see here. This summarizes online bullying. The previous slide was school-based bullying. This is online bullying, and it's pretty much the same thing. But you can see that at least 1 out of 5 have been targeted because of their race, because of their gender, because of their age, because of their sexual orientation. But 1 out of 10 said disability and religion. So these are the reasons. And I truly believe that empathy can make huge headway in sort of counteracting this. Being targeted because of race, this is what we found, is these populations and the races that were being targeted in terms of the proportions. And I can get you more information on this. And then gender, as you might imagine, we saw those who are neither female nor male, they were being targeted much more often, those who were transgender specifically. And then finally, sexual orientation, those who indicated they were not heterosexual, and this, of course, would probably align with the experiences at your schools, they were statistically significantly more likely to be targeted. So again, where does empathy play a role with all of this? You would hope that, again, we appreciate other people's differences. We want, if I'm a student, I would want other people to let me be who I am and let me live how I want to live in terms of how I speak, how I dress, what I like, what I dislike. And to sort of be part of the social contract, I will do the same for other people. By religion, same sort of thing here. We saw that, we see 31%, 32% of Muslims have been targeted. And interestingly, 21% of Catholics, 15% of Hindus, 15% of Jewish, although I saw statistics this morning coming out of the ADL about the drastic increase in hate-based speech towards those who are of the Jewish faith. So we studied this, and what we found is that empathy matters in a variety of ways. Where we've got high levels of empathy, we have much less bullying across the student body. And where we have lower empathy, then we've got, of course, more school bullying, and we've got more cyberbullying. Participation, again, by the students in this sample. To summarize this, students with low levels of empathy, about 2 times as likely to bully at school, and over 2 times as likely to cyberbully in the last month. Said another way, students with high levels of empathy were over 2 times less likely to bully and almost 3 times less likely to cyberbully. We were almost done with our data. And so I want to share that we recently published this article focused on bias-based cyberbullying. And what we found is that empathy matters a great deal. Again, it's wonderful for you and I to say that we think it matters, but it was really awesome for us to be able to prove that via nationally representative data. And again, this just shows those students with high levels of empathy, they were much less likely to engage in race-based cyberbullying and religious-based cyberbullying. Empathy matters. Okay, so thank you for allowing me to set the backdrop. Let's immediately get into strategies and solutions. First off, it's so important for us to continue to look for opportunities to have reflective exercises with our students. So in this case, just let's say a picture or a scene from maybe your classroom. We see a couple of girls in the middle, and they look like they're whispering about, let's say, this girl who looks sad as she leans against her desk. And then we have a couple of boys on the margins, on the sides there. And so the point here, if this is some sort of reflective exercise, we want to talk with, let's say, those boys specifically about, okay, you see something happening. In that moment, you see someone's being targeted, someone's being hurt, and clearly their emotions betray that hurt. And then we have a couple of other students who are instigating this, and it's leading to that harm, and you're not doing anything in the moment. What is causing you to not do anything in the moment? I'm going to, by the way, go ahead and start my video because, it's just maybe nice to see my facial reactions as well in that small thumbnail. So again, we want the students to consider on the side, what is keeping you from intervening? And what can you do in that moment? If you're not comfortable in that moment, what can you do immediately after? How would you approach the girl who's being targeted? How might you approach the girls who are doing the rumors and the gossip and the whispering and the hurtful activities? What could that look like? Do you need to do it together, or do you feel comfortable doing it individually? And so there's so many instances of this sort of stuff happening. And I know that we don't have a lot of margin as educators trying to get through our lesson plan. Sometimes it's just exhausting to get involved in these sorts of instances. But as you have energy, it doesn't have to be multiple times a day. But if you could just do it maybe once a day, if you could just say, I challenge myself to step in once a day and just have a conversation in this light, this reflective exercise, maybe just maybe it'll help those students know what to do the next time. It'll encourage them to do the right thing, to make sure this girl in the middle is okay, encouraged, is supported, knows that others have their back, knows that it doesn't matter what those other girls think. We still think you're awesome. So reflective exercises are just extremely, extremely important. Another activity is called zoom in and zoom out. What we find is that youth tend to be very empathetic towards family members. And I know you might be like, are you sure? Even siblings? But yes, in general, they tend to be empathetic towards siblings and family members, and then also best friends. Where they struggle with empathy has to do with that larger circle of classmates, of other peers. And so what we want them to do, and this is all about perspective taking, we want them to kind of zoom in terms of, okay, this person is being targeted. Maybe they're your best friend. And yes, I'm sure you can definitely understand how they're feeling. And that's great. We love that you have empathy there. But let's also zoom out a little bit and think about, okay, who else was involved? And also, did your best friend do anything to play a role here to really upset another kid? And so how could that other kid feel, which might have prompted the reaction? And so just again, taking a broader perspective and taking into account other people's perspectives, that goes such a long way. But you have to keep, again, zooming in to that other person's perspective, zooming out to see, okay, what about that teacher when they were trying to intervene? What about these bystanders when they were laughing? What about you when you sort of silently or passively condoned what happened? Again, zooming back into that person, to you. Taking that moment, taking just those few minutes to have that conversation, I think goes a long way in helping that kid become a little bit more familiar with the task of intentionally thinking through everyone's role in a situation, indirect or direct. Again, it's called zooming in and zooming out. Name it, tame it. That's a phrase coined by a prominent scholar named Dan Siegel. And I really like it because it focuses on emotions. So when we're growing up, and maybe even sometimes now as adults, something happens and this gigantic cloud of a very heavy emotion descends on us. Maybe it is anger, maybe it is frustration, maybe it's sadness or humiliation or even fear. In that moment, we are completely, again, in a fog. We can't function, we can't think logically or rationally about our next steps. But what needs to happen in that moment is we need to name the emotion. We need to also name what prompted that emotion specifically. And by doing that, by just articulating it instead of just allowing yourself to be engulfed by that fog, you're able to gain more control. When you gain more control, you can bracket it at least a little bit to help you climb out of that cloud and then figure out more of a rational plan. And that could be just working with a counselor, talking to a friend about what to do in that situation, even just thinking rationally about what your parents have told you to do in that situation. It just helps them, again, to get out of that emotional fog, but they have got to name and they've got to tame exactly what's going on. And by naming it, that's how you tame it. This activity is called the needs of others. So I'm not sure what sort of age group you work with. Maybe it's elementary, maybe it's middle schoolers, maybe it's high schoolers. So again, let's say you have a little bit of margin during your lesson plan time or advisory period or a Friday afternoon before dismissal, something like that. Maybe you go online and you download a picture of a youth in a similar age group or bracket, but that student or that picture that you download of that youth from the web for this activity, that kid is sad, or you can tell that they're emotionally struggling. They don't necessarily have to be holding up a sign that says hope, but you can tell that something's wrong. Okay, so you give that to all the students, and you're like, okay, what I want you to do, students, a little bit of an assignment here. I want you to write out a story about this kid. I want you to write out their name. I want you to tell me a little bit about their home situation. Are they living with their mom and dad? Do they have any siblings? Do they have a pet? What's the pet's name? Then also tell me about their interests. What do they like? What do they love? What do they dislike? So just kind of build a story. By the way, as they do this, many times their own sort of life kind of comes through in that story because they're pulling on different threads to build out something fictional. So you also, as they're writing the story, say, what I'd also like you to do as you're writing the story is, what are their needs? What is this kid's needs? physical needs. Maybe you'd say food, shelter, clothing. Also, what are their emotional needs? What are their psychological needs? Maybe you'd even talk about spiritual needs or whatever else. But then we get into who's responsible for meeting those needs? What are the parents or guardians responsible for? What is the school responsible for? What about his best friend? What are they definitely responsible for? Also, what is the student featured in the picture? I mean, they've got to be responsible for something too. What is that? Write that out. And then what are you responsible for as the classmate? If they were in your class, what would you be responsible for? Just as I bet you hope to be a decent human being, that comes with responsibility. So what's your responsibility in this kid's life? I know it might seem a little bit pedantic and maybe a little bit labored, but you can see through this process that the child or the teenager, as they're working through the assignment, they start to think about other people. They start to think about that other person's needs, moving from the simple ones, physical, to the more nuanced, complicated ones. And then thinks not just about how other people need to meet this kid's role or kid's needs, including themselves, that other kid, but also what is my role? Ideally, we're raising adults and young people who are willing to survey the landscape. And if they see a need, they're like, I can do this. I can rise up. That is a need. That is a fellow human being. And I've been conditioned to kind of come through in some capacity, at the very least, making sure they're okay. You and I do that when we see someone slip and fall, when something happens. You and I, without a doubt, we do that. Let's help our youth get to that point too. I mentioned that our youth, of course, love technology, and they've gravitated towards all these platforms and mediums. And what I've also liked seeing is the embrace of technology and platforms in order to share positivity, to share kindness, to share stories of empathy, to share stories of overcoming. I've also seen students in schools, and who knows if your school has these resources, but they have a little office or studio where they're able to do podcasts. And with these podcasts, they might have daily or weekly sessions. Maybe it's also tied into the morning announcements. You have a team of students who do the morning announcements, and they might every so often tell a story of another kid, with permission, of course. But these stories, of course, are meant to breed empathy, are meant to be inspiring, are meant to kind of plant seeds to amend the culture in a way where it's like, you know what? We do the right thing around here. We do the mature thing. We do the noble thing. We do the classy thing. That means coming through for others. That means looking out for other people's best interests. That means putting ourselves in their shoes. And so podcasts are so valuable towards this end, because we know our youth love podcasts. We know our youth, the rest of the student body, they will gladly subscribe, whether it's a vlog or whether it's just audio only. They will gladly, be part of that audience because they want to be in the know, because it's the fellow students. Use this to your advantage as part of your messaging strategy as you're trying to build empathy and all these other components that you're working towards. Many, many years ago, maybe even when you and I were growing up, there was an activity called Cross the Line. And maybe some schools even continue to do this to this day, which I think is fine. It was also popularized by a TV show, I think it was about 15 years ago as well, called If You Really Knew Me on MTV. Again, If You Really Knew Me. Perhaps that rings a bell. But here's the thing. I can send you videos related to this specific activity. We just want to make sure that the questions that are asked, they're vetted, they're appropriate. Number two, we want to make sure that no kid feels shamed. Number three, we want to make sure that we have mental health professionals like counselors there on staff if any of these questions sort of bring up certain unpleasant memories that the student then has to kind of work through. But as you probably understand, that the bottom line is to convey that many of us have heavy stuff going on in our lives. That other kid, they seem super popular. They might feel like they've got everything together, but they're just another adolescent trying to make it, trying to find their way, just like you and me. And that demands grace, and that demands, again, kindness, and that demands us just being respectful and just being a solid human being towards them. So again, there's a specific way to do this, and I'm happy to advise you accordingly if you've wanted to do this, or if you've done it in the past and it worked well and now it's time to do it again. You just want to sort of amend it to make sure it's really well done. But I'm a fan of the activity, again, as long as it's done well. I also think a lot about role-playing scenarios. So when it comes to online harassment type activities, I've written a number of role-playing scenarios. Amanda mentioned that we'll be getting you a number of handouts. And so you'll be getting a handout specifically with updated, super current, super relevant scenarios involving harassment or threats or race-based or religious-based cruelty or hate speech, or a number of these other forms of peer-based harassment. And so what we found in the research and what others have found is that you might say, hey, student, if this ever happened to you, would you know what to do? And they're like, yeah, for sure. I totally know what to do. Don't worry about it. I know what to do. It's fine. But then in the moment, when it happens, they freeze. They get stuck. They don't know what to do because it's so heavy, because it's so major. It blindsides them. And role-playing scenarios, they help a student work through an action plan of knowing what to do. Because it's like, okay, I remember, yes, now this is happening and I'm about to freak out, but wait, I can handle this. We talk through that scenario and what not to do and what to do. Because all these role-playing scenarios that we will get you, they've got discussion questions afterwards, asking about, again, what to do, how would you act if you were the administrator, the counselor, the bystander, the best friend, the parent, and what not to do. So it really helps them to kind of, again, figure out an action plan and know what to do when it happens. So check those out. So here's, again, some more simple types of questions. And this can also happen through those reflective exercises as you see them naturally unfold in the classroom, in the hallway, in the lunchroom, in the school. Again, it doesn't have to be a production. I know you might be saying to yourself, I don't have 7 to 10 minutes to do this, but you can truly do this in like 2 minutes. Even just one question will cause like a pause and a reflection, which is what we want. Media. I think a lot about media because my kids, maybe your kids, our students, they love media and they love learning through media. It also feels like their attention spans are shrinking, unfortunately, but hopefully we're trying to do all that we can to keep them broad and long. These are my favorite books related to cultivating empathy. If any of you want to message me and say, this is the age group I'm working with, and maybe even gender or something like that, or interests, I'm happy to give you more specifics. But again, we'll get you these slides. This is what I would recommend, and you can see that they're for a variety of age groups. So I just think that they're valuable, especially if you've got readers in your school or even readers in your home. I hope my kids continue to love reading, and we'll see how that goes as they continue to grow up. But books matter. I can still remember the storylines from a few of these, and how if I think about the protagonist, I am inspired to be more empathetic. It does matter. Here are my favorite shows and movies. Some of them are super recent. Some of them are a little bit from back in the day. But the point is that when we're showing a movie at school, or if you're a parent or guardian and you're showing a movie at home, you have got to stop after the movie and have a conversation. And maybe it's too late, but the next morning when you're dropping your kids off at school, it's like, what are the takeaways? How can you apply that to your life? How are you inspired? How are you positively changed by what you saw in the film with this character or that character? How can you use it to become a better version of yourself? Those conversations have to happen with the movies and ideally with the books as well. Again, feel free to follow up with me if you need any more specifics about these, but these are, again, my favorites. This is called adapted basketball. And, it's a general sort of idea where maybe, just maybe, we have students using blindfolds, or maybe, just maybe, they're trying to play basketball and they have to only use one hand. And maybe we don't have a basketball hoop, but we have another student holding up a hula hoop. There's a number of things that you can do. But the point is that we want them to viscerally understand that life is challenging for people who are differently abled. And that could look like a number of things. But then we want them to consequently be more gracious and intentionally find ways to accommodate with kindness. How can we get you included? How can we get you to participate? No, I don't really care about winning. I care about you being included, because that's what I'm all about. That's the mature perspective. I can play with my friends a little bit later, and then I can focus on winning. But now I want you to feel included and valued and seen and noticed and part of what we're trying to do here in the gym. Adapted basketball, and you can of course choose any other sport or activity. You probably heard that the Netherlands is one of the happiest places in the world. And so what they tend to do is what's called klassen time, or the class hour. Forgive me if you've already heard this, but I just think it's so cool. And what they do from your first week of kindergarten to your last week of high school, every single week of your school year, you have that hour where everyone gets together and they typically sit in a circle and they talk about life. They talk about, hey, what's going on in your life? Or are you dealing with any problems right now? Are you dealing with any issues? Are things kind of difficult? Sometimes students have things to say. Sometimes they don't. And always someone is assigned the task of bringing a treat. whether it's Rice Krispie treats or brownies or cake. You just sit together for an hour, and it's very, very valuable because number one, it conveys that we're all in this together and we're here to help each other. And life is challenging for all of us. And maybe you don't have anything to share this week, but you might next week. And this kid, last week they were struggling. This week they're doing better because we listened, we encouraged, we provided a safe space. So very valuable. And I know you're thinking, again, I just don't have the margin here at my school or in my classroom. But I bet if you're creative, I bet you can find a way. 20 minutes, 15 minutes, minimum of 15 minutes, I would say. You can do this. Maybe you don't want to make brownies, but you can go buy a bunch of fruit roll-ups or, fruit by the foots or whatever they're called these days, and just hand them out. And let's have a bit of a conversation. And who knows, it just takes one kid to be vulnerable. And then you can imagine in the Netherlands, every kid is comfortable being vulnerable because it's just how it's done. But in our schools, maybe it takes a little bit, but then it happens. People want to share. Our kids want to share. And by the way, they are sharing very, very boldly and very, very vulnerably online with their social media posts. So they understand that they don't need to pose and posture and pretend that they have it all together. They're willing to share, and that provides us the opening that we need. I've also seen schools have competitions, not random acts of kindness, but purposeful acts of kindness. Maybe grade versus grade, classroom versus classroom. Like you have door decorating contests. Well, this would be another. And I know you might be thinking, this seems a little bit, like forced or fabricated because we're rewarding them with prizes to be kind. But in my opinion, whatever it takes to kind of grease the wheels, I'm for that. And if it leads to people feeling better about themselves, people being recipients of kindness, I'm good with that. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, if we stop and pause and reflect with those students, they'll be like, dear heavens, I kind of felt awesome after I did that. And I think I want to do that more often. And then maybe we have contests every single week. There's a number of things that can be done. There's another campaign or program called Secret Kindness Agents. It's by Ferial Person, an educator out of Illinois. And again, I'm happy to send you that information later, but it was done with high schoolers. Again, secret kindness agents. You might think that high schoolers are just going to roll their eyes and think that it's incredibly lame. But when they did it and they had at the end of the week all sorts of reflective exercises, so many students were like, man, that was amazing. Like, I felt really cool. And now I want this to be part of my identity. I'm looking to feel better about myself. I'm looking to not be so hyper-focused on my own problems. This takes my eyes off of my own problems and just keeps them on other stuff, on other people. And I'm just doing better mentally and in terms of like my health and my well-being, simply because I'm focused on others. And I'm looking for ways to kind of come through for them, to be a blessing in their lives. Consider that. Yes, it does take a little bit of intentionality and a little bit of planning, but who knows, your students might run with it. And it could be fun. And you can get local businesses to donate prizes if you need those incentives. If you need help with that, happy to also provide you with my sort of tips for success there as well. So my partner and I, when we were dating, and this maybe everyone does it when they start dating, we decided to take ballroom dancing lessons. And to be honest, it was challenging, but we were very loving towards each other and very patient, even though I would step on her foot and she would step on my foot. And maybe my frame wasn't exactly tight and I forgot a step and she remembered and I kept forgetting the step and she kept remembering. We worked together. What I've also seen in schools, and I think this is really awesome, is when you have ballroom lessons or dance lessons, and it could be the salsa or the mamba, the merengue, anything. The point is that we've got students forcibly sort of connected to interact with each other in this close manner and to work together because they want to succeed. They don't want to look like morons to the rest of the peer group. They want to work together, and that takes communication, oral communication. It takes, body language and tone communication as well. All those sorts of like socio-emotional cues. They work together and they figure it out. And I think that also breeds empathy because it's like, I'm struggling, you're struggling, but we're going to get this. And so I think this could be an incredibly useful tool as we're continuing to think of strategies, research-informed strategies to help breed or produce or level up our students with more empathy as they're moving forward. So consider this. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I'm a huge fan of her. She's a writer, an author, social activist, incredibly prolific. She created a TED Talk many, many years ago, but it has always stuck with me. And, I tie it in with assignments and, some of my other colleagues, my educator friend, Phyllis Fagel over in Washington at Sheridan School, she also does this activity. Basically, a single story is where somebody adopts a stereotype about you, and that stereotype is used to basically interact with you and judge you, and this preconceived opinion or sort of conception about you dictates everything that they do related to you. Basically, it flattens your experience. So no longer are you a product of so many different factors and elements and experiences and efforts. You're just, in my case, Asian Indian, or in her case, Nigerian. So, if we're creating a single story about Samir, who's Asian Indian, you might say, his parents probably have a very strong Indian accent. Maybe they own a 7-Eleven. Maybe they're highly, highly academically oriented and extremely strict about everything, and not very fun, because that's just how Indian families might be. Just again, flattening my entire experience, my entire life, and interacting towards me with that in mind. So when it came to Chimamanda's single story, she from Nigeria came to the US for college. And so unfortunately, her roommate adopted a single story about her. Her roommate was shocked to find that Chimamanda knew how to use a stove, because she assumed that Chimamanda, again, growing up in Nigeria, would just be, heating meat over open fires. The roommate was also shocked that Chimamanda listened to popular US music and just assumed that Chimamanda listened to tribal music, et cetera, et cetera. And so she shares about this in her TED Talk, but what's also so compelling is that Chimamanda readily admits that she has been guilty of adopted single stories about others. For example, before she went to Mexico for the first time, she just assumed, based on what she heard about immigrants and Mexicans from the US media, that they were lazy, that they were large criminals and entitled, and all of this completely patently false nonsense. And so she went to Mexico, and her eyes were opened and her heart was humbled and broken, because she saw extremely hardworking people who love family and love community and care about each other in remarkable ways that are distinctly different from how the masses care about each other here in the United States. And so all of this ties into an activity, because in schools, you would have the students watch the TED Talk, and then you would give them the assignment of writing maybe 1 to 2 pages about when they've adopted a single story about someone else, and when someone else has adopted a single story about them. And that's when it's powerful, because I bet everyone, including each of you, has been stereotyped in some capacity, maybe related to your hair color, maybe related to your body type, maybe related to race, sexual orientation, identity, gender, disability, et cetera, whatever it could be. People have adopted single stories about us, and it's been unfair, and it's been wrong, and it's affected us. So through this activity, it breeds empathy as you have your eyes opened a little bit more. Many schools have done international fairs over the years, diversity fairs, et cetera. I think that these are valuable, but they can't just be sort of like okay, let's do it on August 31st, and then that's basically, we've checked a box, that's it. It has to be just one component of this prolonged set of initiatives throughout the entire school year. And you could do this in a variety of ways. Many of them are also tied into an international food fest. So the International Fair, of course, celebrates fashion, it celebrates culture, it celebrates the countries, but then tied into it is the food festival, where people bring in cuisine and dishes, and we've even had schools have it so that you have to go around from station to station and get like a passport stamped, where you try the food, and that's all well and good, but you also learn, let's say, 3 fun facts about that country. Otherwise, you don't get your passport stamped. And so again, you do that activity, you do another activity. There's a number of things that you can do, but the point is that we're trying to help our kids just understand that inclusivity is what makes us better. Our differences are actually what makes us beautiful, and can add so much richness and amazingness really to what we're trying to do here in our schools, our communities, our nations, and our world. I'm Indian, and so some of you might be familiar with the festival of Holi, which is the springtime festival, which relates to new beginnings. It's also tied into love against hate and good against evil. There's a number of components. But we've also seen that Holy has been more and more introduced to the popular culture here in the US in a variety of ways, one of which would be color runs. And to be honest, I don't have like a problem with color runs. Truly, I don't. I think color runs are really fun when people are throwing colored powder at you and throwing colored water at you and so forth and so on, etc. But what I would like to see in general, and I think you'll agree with me, is that we want to make sure that we are appreciating the culture and not appropriating the culture. And so it would be great as we have color runs, and as we have other activities which kind of pull from different cultures and different nation groups, etc., that we do have more informed and intelligent conversations about, okay, what's the history here? What's the heritage here? What's the cultural significance? And it doesn't have to be like a Wikipedia entry. It could just be 1 to 2 to 3 takeaways that are fun to remember. I was like, wow, that's so awesome. And that's really, really cool about that country or that people group. And so let's try to figure out how we can do that at our schools as well. Just as another quick example, and then we'll pretty soon here move to Q&A. I think about the Sikh religion, and it's kind of surprising and a little bit disappointing that not a lot of people really understand the Sikh religion, even though it's the 5th largest in the world. We've got at least 25 million sort of adherents to the faith. And I just wish that all that ignorance was dealt with in some small capacity. Here we have what's called Dastar Bandi, which is a rite of passage, which is where a young boy between the ages of, let's say, 11 and 17 or so, receives a turban and understands that, okay, now you're a man. And with that comes, specific responsibilities, and also comes with a level of respect. And we're believing, again, with the community that surrounds you, you're able to rise up and achieve those rise up to those responsibilities that are now on your shoulders as a man. And we think about other rites of passage. You think about quinceañera, you think about bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs. There's a lot of things that we do in our culture, but for some reason it seems like some faiths are just ignored or neglected, or maybe everyone's too busy and just too insular and only cares about their own faith, or no faith at all, which is fine. But the point is that in our schools, I think it's kind of incumbent on us, if we want to cut down on the hate speech and the ignorance, to figure out ways to creatively and concisely teach about this sort of stuff. That's how we cultivate empathy. Because again, students just want to be left to live how they want to live. And if that's the case, then we should let other people live how they want to live. On Amazon, you can buy a lot of these emotion cards, and I'm not sure if you've used them. You can use them with elementary, middle, and high schoolers in different ways. These are just a few of them. There's so many more emotions on different emotion cards. With very young kids, obviously, you just focus on the pictures, and you talk about what that emotion is, because at a young age, it's all about just being able to recognize and articulate that this is how I'm feeling. When it comes to, let's say, middle school type age groups, we want the student to be able to, of course, not just understand and be able to tell the difference between different sorts of emotions, but we want them to be able to respond in a pro-social appropriate way. So if someone is sad, what are some specific things that come to mind to cheer them up? And yeah, maybe you're just sort of winging it, but maybe you could be a little bit more, again, intentional about it. And then additionally, if you're struggling, what are some things that you want other people to do? So you fill in the gaps. If they give you specific strategies and ideas about cheering you up and you think that they're incomplete, well, clue them in as to other things that you would like to see. What you're doing is adding tools to their toolbox, which will then bear fruit with the other relationships and interactions that they have. And then with older students, of course, it's more about being able to relate, not just with friends and peer group, but even just strangers. If they're struggling with some of these really, really delicate types of emotions, such as being ashamed, being humiliated, being nervous. What are some strategies you can employ as it relates to mindfulness, as it relates to mental health, to pull yourself out of fogs, to pull yourself out of that anxiety spiral? What are some things that can be done? We want our high schoolers, our upper schoolers to have those top of mind. And these emotions cards are just a very practical way to keep it fun, keep it colorful, and to kind of talk that out. We cannot just assume that all students kind of know what to do. And I feel like if we assume that they just know what to do, then they fall short, and that's what leads to more issues. I also think digital projects are awesome. So we can, of course, give them an iPad if they're young in a highly protected case, but we can also give them, a phone. They have phones, etc. We can give them better equipment, drones, etc. But the point is that I like to assign them activities in small groups. And in this case, it would be related to what can you film, some sort of small skit, scenario, whatever, related to empathy, the importance of empathy, or how we can build empathy, or how empathy is lacking in this situation until these other students came along and rescued that other kid, whatever it is. So when they do this, they're also able to talk about different emotions that they're featuring. So empathy is necessary to deal with a variety of emotions. And so they talk about that emotion, and then they're able to sort of say, this is what I focused on, and then I tied it into empathy. But then the other students are able to say, I was able to connect with that emotion. And so consequently, I also need empathy in these situations. And so when you're also presenting your own story or video, short form video, etc., you talk about how this was very real to you. Maybe you dealt with this same sort of situation previous week or the previous month or last school year or whatever it is. And then you talk about, is it easy to convey some of these emotions? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And then what we found through these sorts of activities is that as each student creates a product of a 2 to 3 minute clip or a 30-second to 60-second clip, whatever you want to do, and then presents them and has a little bit of a Q&A afterwards, the students do feel connected with each other because it's tied into heavy emotions, real world sort of experiences that adolescents have to face offline or online, and then empathy. This sort of activity has to do with babies crying. And so you might go online, find a picture of a baby crying, and you give it to all your students, and you just have a conversation. Why might this baby be crying? Hands go up and they say, maybe they're hungry, maybe they're tired, maybe they have a tummy ache, maybe they're lonely, maybe they want to be held, maybe they want their back rubbed, etc. And then we talk about, okay, so this baby is struggling, and they have chosen crying as the way to express their sort of discomfort or what they're dealing with. What are some other ways that they could express what they're dealing with? Screaming, punching, pinching, fidgeting, throwing things down from their food tray, whatever it is. And so then we get into, sometimes is it hard to express emotions if you're a baby? Yes. Well, whose responsibility is it to sort of like graciously and patiently and kindly extract how that baby is feeling and then figure out some sort of solution to help the baby feel better? Parents' responsibility, babysitter's responsibility, etc. And then we get into what's relevant for them. Have you ever felt where, okay, maybe you've cried, but maybe you've also felt some other very heavy emotions and you've chosen to express it in a variety of other ways, maybe by yelling, maybe by punching a wall, maybe by acting out through a minor form of delinquency, etc. Is it because you didn't really feel comfortable or didn't know how to articulate that heavy emotion, didn't know how to get help, didn't know what words to use to solicit that assistance? And then who's responsible to help you? How can we figure out a more logical, rational, calm way to get that help? And then how can that other person best serve you? So you start with the baby, make it really, really elementary for them, and then you bring it back to them. Again, you're just talking about a baby crying. That's the activity. I'm a big fan of Tim Tebow, and every spring, Tim Tebow organizes what's called Night to Shine. This year, I think it's February 10th or so. I'll have to check the calendar. But the point is that Night to Shine is organized for kids with special needs, but he enlists the help of kids without special needs to come and serve as waiters, as ushers, as fellow dance partners, and they build meaningful, quality, true relationships with those kids with special needs moving forward. So then they hang out, they have sleepovers, it's not just sort of like a perfunctory head nod in the hallway, acknowledging that they're alive, but no, it's like a friendship, all because of Night to Shine. And I love that. So the takeaway for me and for you is, how are we intentionally taking our students or our children or teenagers in our own households and putting them in situations that admittedly might be awkward to start off with, but will stretch them, will soften their heart, maybe even break their heart a little, maybe even remind them that they're very fortunate and they have a role to play in making other people's lives better, easier, more awesome. Just like we have got to get our kids to be thinking about, I've got it good, and I do want to be a blessing. I do want to demonstrate kindness and come through for others. I want that to be part of my identity. And so maybe they don't participate in Night to Shine, but we think about Habitat for Humanity. We think about, in my community, we've got the homeless population. We think about human trafficking is big in my area as well. So our kids do care about social justice issues. I want them to be in situations where they hear the stories of other individuals who have had hard lives, who have had it rough and difficult. And I truly want their hearts not just to be softened, I frankly want their hearts to be shattered. I want them to be irreparably changed by experiencing these interactions and feeling compelled to do something about it. And yes, maybe they'll be able to do some things as a teenager, but that will change them so that as an adult, they're just others focused. I want to raise other focused kids, teens, and I hope you do as well. And we want to shepherd them in our classrooms and in our community as well. We're almost done here. Another activity that I like to do is creative writing. So when I was growing up, I loved creative writing. Ever since I had kids, been kind of elbowed to the side. I hope to get back to it somewhat soon. But what we want to do in this case is, write a letter or a thank you card to someone here at school who has made a difference in your life. Could be a teacher, could be a coach, could be a lunchroom staff member who never gets recognized, but who always smiles at you. Could be a custodial employee. So here would just be a student who wrote a thank you letter to a thank you sort of poem to a teacher. And yes, it's not going to win some sort of poetry or literary award, but they did their best. And the point is that they will give it to the other person, and the assignment forced them to stop for a little bit, put themselves in another person's shoes, and feel thankful. And that's what we want. We want that to be more and more of a default. I personally want to live a life of gratefulness every single day. I trust that you want to as well. That's, again, one thing that we can control, given that we can't control who knows what's going to happen to us in 2024. But we can control our attitude of gratefulness. And I want our students, the students I shepherd, the students that you shepherd, to also move in that direction. Maybe not perfectly or fully, but in time. And then finally, gardening. Gardening is massive, right? Because you think about ecological perspectives taking. We want them to think about the wonder of seeds. We want them to think about the importance of uncontaminated water in growing a plant. And by just taking the time to care for another living organism, maybe at school, if you have that facility on your campus, maybe at home, it really does help. But it also provides an opportunity for the conversation, for the connection to take place, the dialogue, the relationship building, the bonding. All that is so valuable. And then again, slowly and surely, the empathy building takes place through the gardening activities as well. Humans of New York, just again, a couple other things as I keep an eye on the clock. Some of you follow the Humans of New York page on Instagram. If you're not familiar with, the creator goes around and captures stories of other New York residents and posts their picture, and then in the caption writes their story. But these stories tend to be stories of overcoming, resilience, or empathy, kindness, and connecting with and helping out others. I've seen schools do that as well. This is Humans of Marjory Stoneman Douglas, MSD. And so in this case, we've got a student being featured, and let's say I'm a student who goes to that school. Maybe normally I wouldn't, give this kid the time of day. I've got my own friend group. I don't necessarily care about this other kid, but I would follow this page because it's associated with my school. It's an Instagram account. I'm always on Instagram. I would read the story, and then it's like, holy moly, this kid has gone through what I've gone through. I can relate to that. And right there opens up a door where maybe, just maybe, I'll say hi to them. I'll chat with them, sit next to them at lunch, stand next to them in the hallway for a minute and chat with them. A relationship is formed because a social media page has opened them up, opened their story up to my eyes and to my heart. I think this is my last activity. You have your students write out their best and worst things that have ever happened to them and the best and worst decisions that they've ever made. Create small groups, have a little bit of a dialogue and debriefing. Some of those students will be willing to share, some won't. But as a few share from each of those small groups, you again see that, wow, many of us, again, we seem pretty different. All of us are living these very disparate, separate lives, but that's not actually the case. We're all kind of living very, very similar lives, facing the same sorts of issues at home, same sorts of like personal, internal, mental health type struggles, scholastic struggles, social struggles. And so that, again, can breed empathy, realizing that, again, everyone's fighting a hard battle. As I close, I will just say that I don't have time to share with you any videos, but I will send you, if you want, multiple really cool, compelling, not lame videos that I've collected over the years of, in this case, Campbell Remis, who sews stuffed animals for children in children's hospitals, Sonika Mimon, who cares deeply about elderly residents of nursing homes who, by the way, have been forgotten by many family members, but she goes in and celebrates their birthdays in these assisted living facilities, again, just because she has such an empathetic heart. This is Max. This is Austin Gutwind, who cares a lot about war-torn children in the continent of Africa who have been separated from their parents and just wanted to use his prowess at basketball to shoot free throws to raise money. And this is Max Bobholz, who cares so much about baseball and Little League that he decided to collect gently used Little League equipment across the nation to send it to different countries and go over there to teach kids how to play baseball simply because he heard their stories of struggle and pain and sadness. These stories inspire our kids. Many times we are very, very inclined to share the horror stories or the cautionary tales with our kids, but I think sharing inspirational stories with our students is a lot more beneficial because that's what they want. They want to be inspired. I want to be inspired on a daily basis. You want to be inspired on a daily basis as well. So let's use that to your advantage. I will share my contact information later, but for now, I do want to stop and take a deep breath, and I'll, of course, focus on the chat, focus on the Q&A that'll be orchestrated by our team, and thank you so much for your time and your attention.
Dr. Hinjuya, thank you so much. This was really a wonderful presentation. I think that I love how many practical things that there are that we can take back to our teams and our campuses. The other really thing that impacted me was, yes, this is geared towards kids, but this is so pertinent for adults as well. And so I just love that. Thank you so much. I am going to share, we have an evaluation for you all, and I believe my colleague, one of my colleagues will put this link in the chat as well. This is anonymous feedback. If you would provide for us, we provide this information to SAMHSA, who federally funds us, and it assists us in planning future meetings and programs and allows us to have continued funding to provide training and services for folks all over. I did want to say this, we are specifically supporting Region 6, which is Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arkansas. The MHTTC network is nationwide and includes tribal communities and Alaska and Hawaii, and there is an MHTTC that serves your region. So I highly recommend that you look up the MHTTC network and find out who supports you in your area. They will have specified trainings and opportunities for you all as well. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you. Jennifer just put it in the chat as well. So if you want to do that. And then finally, if you'd like to keep in touch with us, we would love that. This is links to our Facebook newsletter and LinkedIn. Our newsletter is really the best place to find the most current information about what opportunities we have that are upcoming. For instance, Dr. Hinduja will also be offering another training. It is called Cyberbullying Actionable Strategies for Administrators. This one is in April, on April 25th from 12 to 1:30 p.m. Central Time. All of that information will be put into our website, will also be in a newsletter and promoted on social media. So again, these are no-cost trainings and resources for you all. We have a litany of products and trainings that are also on our website as well that are great opportunities for anyone who needs them. So I think with that, I will stop sharing here and we can go to the Q&A section if that works. We've got a few more minutes left. Let me pull it up right quick. Okay, so the first one was when you were talking about data and in regards to the low percentage of youth who might outreach school personnel for help. Someone commented that said, I can't help but wonder if they have shared with school personnel in the past and it wasn't met with a healthy, appropriate response. as well as bullying has been a big issue, and they often feel like nothing is done to the bully, and for good reason, because the school's hands are tied to a certain extent on what they're able to do. And I thought you might like to address that.
Yeah, so everyone on this call probably feels that, man, I really wish that our school could do more, and maybe those administrators do feel like their hands are tied. But what I would like to prevent is them feeling like their hands are tied because of misinformation. The reality is that, and I will cover this in my April session, educators and administrators are supported by many cases at the Supreme Court, appellate court, and lower court level to action online expression, so online behaviors by youth, even if it occurred during winter break, summer break, etc., weekends, evenings, as long as it involved students who go to that school, or as long as it's affecting one of the students at that school's ability to feel safe, and also the learning environment that you're trying to maintain the integrity of. If you're able to articulate that that stuff is being compromised, you can step in. And so I'm happy to send you, documentation and some sort of handout that fleshes that out if you'll message me later, because if that gets passed on to your administrator, maybe that'll give them the evidence that they need and the information they need to act, because they have to. Otherwise, we've seen cases of you were negligent in this situation, which leads to reputational damage and financial damage to the school district, because they were reasonably aware that this could have gone sideways very quickly, and it did, but they did nothing about it. You've probably seen some Washington Post articles in the last couple of months related to the increase in lawsuits, where school districts, unfortunately, because of inadequate or improper responses to these sorts of situations, they're just in deep water. And we have got to avoid that by doing our part. I really believe you are on this call. We just hope the administrators, they understand that. And I'm happy to chat with them if need be.
Again, I will share contact information after this as well. So there was another just interesting comment that says, thank you. I appreciate the practical activities I can use and share with faculty. Do you have any ideas for empathy building around autism? Like your adaptive basketball, but to help students empathize with students specifically with ASD.
Yeah, I've written a couple of blogs related to that, and so I just have to dig them up. And so I mentioned, I think it was Susan, to just sort of reach out to me online, and then I'll do all that I can to support her. Really good question.
I got another question that is, and I don't have clarity on this because some people are direct messaging me, so I'm not sure if they're asking specifically about the MHCTC, but I think it's appropriate to ask you, what sorts of conversations do you have with students about moderating social media use if it is negatively impacting their mental health and relationships?
It's so tricky. And what I first try to do is convey a very positive tone, because if we go into it sort of, with our squinty eyed and our wagging fingers, they're just going to shut down. So I try to speak on their level about how I'm using it and how I'm seeing all sorts of benefits, not just to me, but to my kids, to students. So hopefully that disarms them at the beginning. And then secondly, we just talk about how, you've got such a bright future ahead, and, we're trying to plant seeds to set you up for that amazing future. And we just don't want anything to sort of, unfortunately, undermine it or compromise it or torpedo it even. And so I bet you're probably seeing that sometimes the technology isn't a tool. Sometimes you're actually the tool, and you don't want to be a tool, right? You want it to just be something that you can use to help you level up and succeed in life, but you don't want to be controlled by it. But I'm sure as you reflect some time, or if you let me see your screen time numbers on your device, I bet that they're a little bit shocking. And so self-control, for one, is just such an important skill set to try to build. And I'm not asking you to go cold turkey or anything like that, but let's try to work together on reeling it in. And then we get into identity issues as well, because the student has to know that, and they realize this, if their identity is tied into peer perceptions and follows and their snap streak and likes and comments and all of that, they're going to have a very miserable existence. And so I try to talk to them more about, okay, values. One of the activities I do has to do with, online you can get a list from Google about like 15 values or 30 values or 50 values. I try to do a list of 18 values. Email me and I'll send it to you. And I say, please circle the top 5 values that you want to be known for, that you want to build your life on. And so they spend a little bit of time circling like loyalty or hopefulness or like hardworking, whatever it would be. And I would say, these are, now that we've identified this is what I want you to focus on. This is what you can control. So let's try to get our identity from what we can control, which is our values and our belief system, and also what our future is going to look like, and maybe our faith and maybe our family. But it can't come from peers, because you could be super popular one day, but then one person says one thing, one small piece of juicy gossip, and that's the end for you. You understand that. So they get all that, but just working with them through that conversation slowly but surely, and then bringing them back to those anchors, those non-negotiables, those North Stars that they can build their identity upon. And maybe if they're your own kids in your household, you can have a say in that as well. It is essential.
From what I can tell, I think that is all of the questions in the chat. Again, I'd like to reiterate that I will be sending you an email either this afternoon or tomorrow with links to all of the resources that Samir recommended or referenced today, as well as a link to our survey, a link to the presentation and the slide deck that he presented today. So should you need anything, and I will also, if you're okay with including your contact information in that email as well. So we'll stay on for a few more minutes. If anyone has any further questions, we'll leave the chat open, but thank you so much for your time today and for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you again in future trainings. Samir, there is one further question, and it's wondering if you can touch on how to approach empathy and gossiping. Are there any specific activity ideas? The values activity seems helpful. And if that person needs to reach out to you directly to get more information, I can encourage that as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to that person one-on-one. But for me, in those situations with gossip and rumors, that also, by the way, tends to tie into group chats and some of the things that we're seeing with those dynamics. It's really just one-to-one conversations and identifying what that person who's gossiping is sensitive about themselves. Because if we can kind of make it very real for them, what they would never want used against them, how they would feel if the shoe was on the other foot, so to speak, making it very, very personal. I think that's how you make headway. And sometimes you have to be very raw and very pointed in how you express that, but that is what really makes the difference.
All right, well, if there's nothing further, we will go ahead and give you back 7 minutes to your day. And again, thank you all. Look for an email from me either today or tomorrow. And if you have any further questions or need to contact us with anything, please don't hesitate. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.